Welcome to the Shepherd Education Training Model for Cooperating Teachers. I'm Becky Mercado, and my job today is to introduce you to the ST-11 Student Teacher Assessment System. I'd like to begin by defining some terms you'll see throughout the ST-11 forms. They are standards, functions, and performance indicators. The ST-11 assessments are based on 5 standards. Each standard is divided into subcategories called functions, which help define the standard. The way you can really determine whether the student teacher is approaching, meeting, or exceeding the standard is by looking for observable indicators in their classroom performance, and then determining the quality of that performance. We'll come back to these terms again when we look at the ST-11 rating scales. Let's talk about your specific part in the mentoring and evaluation of a student teacher. As the field-based teacher educator who interacts with the student teacher on a daily basis, your role is critical. It's very important to the student teacher's formative development for you to give them ongoing guidance and feedback, and you'll need a systematic way to do that. The university supervisors use the ST-11 observation form, and you might want to use that as well for your formative feedback. It's based on the same standards and functions as the ST-11 summative that you'll use later in the semester. But you might prefer another method that works for you, such as a two-way journal that you pass back and forth with questions and comments, or some other structure for giving and receiving guidance and feedback on a daily or weekly basis. What's critical is to have some systematic way of letting the student teachers know how they're doing and what needs to be improved. The formative evaluation you're required to complete is the ST-11 CT Summative Evaluation Form. You'll access and submit it using the Shepherd's TK20 online system. If you don't have the ST-11 CT Summative in front of you, please get it now, because we're going to talk about that in detail next. The summative evaluation is based on evidence throughout the student teaching experience to determine an overall rating for each standard and then a final overall rating of the student teacher, including a grade recommendation. Remember, as the evaluator who sees the student teacher the most frequently, you are responsible for verifying that the student teacher has met all 5 standards, which is the minimum requirement for certification. The ratings you give on this summative evaluation should represent the student teacher's performance at the end of student teaching, or at the end of the placement in your classroom. Many cooperating teachers find it helpful to keep a paper copy of the ST-11 CT Summative on hand to check off performance indicators that have been demonstrated or that need improvement in order to meet or exceed a standard. Waiting until the end and trying to remember what was demonstrated is not recommended and might keep the student teacher from receiving important formative feedback for improvement. Now let's look at the format that you'll see on the ST-11 CT Summative. You will see that Standard 1 covers curriculum and planning. The first 2 functions under Standard 1 are shown in the first column. They are A, content, and B, pedagogy. This format is used for all 5 standards. Start by rating each function equally based on the performance indicators demonstrated by the student teacher. Remember that this is a summative evaluation, so you'll need to start early in the semester, perhaps using a paper copy of the form to check off the performance indicators you have observed. Once you've rated all the functions in the standard, you are ready to determine the overall rating for that standard. When you get to standards 4 and 5, you'll notice that some functions require only an awareness level. That's because those functions of the West Virginia Professional Teaching Standards don't really apply to student teachers. Therefore, we ask only that our student teachers demonstrate an awareness of the importance of those functions. To determine an appropriate rating, please ask the student teacher directly about their knowledge of those particular topics. Score the awareness level functions as meets, approaches, or unsatisfactory only. Now look down to the bottom of the page and you'll see the scoring rubrics for determining an overall rating for the standard. Notice that each rating category requires specific criteria. Also notice that not more than one function may be at the approaches level for the overall standard to be met. The final part of the evaluation for each standard is the question of whether or not the student teacher has demonstrated the standard at an acceptable level, or in other words, have they met the standard. It's this overall standard that must be at the meets standard level, and the final question answered yes for the student teacher to satisfy certification requirements. Once you've scored each standard, you'll determine the final overall rating on all 5 standards. On page 6, you will see the criteria for the final overall rating that also provides a final grade recommendation. Now, let's look at how to interpret the rating scale that you'll be using on all the ST-11 forms. You will be evaluating the quality of performance on each function and standard as measured against your expectation of a competent beginning teacher. Exceeds standard requires the student teacher to demonstrate the functions extensively or at a high level of proficiency or effectiveness. If the student teacher performs in a way that's very appropriate for a beginning teacher, then he or she is probably exceeding the standard. If the student teacher's performance on a function or standard is adequate or lacks a high level of effectiveness while still getting the job done, he or she is probably at the meets standard level. This level describes an adequate or acceptable level of proficiency or effectiveness. When rating each of the 5 standards, the meets standard level is the minimum requirement for certification. However, keep in mind that one function of a standard may be rated approaches, and the overall standard will still be met. If you become aware that even one standard is in jeopardy of not being met by the end of the semester, please contact the university supervisor immediately to develop a plan for improvement. We want to support our student teachers to reach certification requirements if they can, but they need to know what improvements are needed to get there. Approaches standard is a marginal or limited level of proficiency or effectiveness, more in line with students in early field placement courses. Some student teachers may begin at this level for some standards or functions, but they are expected to progress to the meets standard level or beyond to qualify for certification. So once more, remember that not more than one function in any standard may be at the approaches level on the summative evaluation, or the student teacher will not meet certification requirements. That's why early and frequent formative feedback is so important. Well, that's it. Thanks so much for your attention to this important information about using the ST-11 Student Teacher Evaluation Forms. If you need a refresher during the semester, refer to the file with slides and transcript of this video. And don't forget the detailed printed manual for using the ST-11 assessment forms. Your completed ST-11 CT summative should be submitted in TK20 no later than the beginning of the last week of the student teaching placement. Each cooperating teacher is asked to contribute feedback on the use of these new student teacher evaluation forms by completing the survey on the last page of the printed guidelines. We need and appreciate your candid comments on how to improve the ST-11 forms. Please return your comments to Shepherd University by way of your student teacher, or email your comments directly to me. Again, thanks so much for your valuable partnership in the evaluation of our student teachers. We greatly appreciate you.